Today on CityCast Boise, how do you help grow a local music scene? That's the question Eric Gilbert with Duck Club Entertainment has been trying to answer for the last dozen years. He joins us to talk about how the company has gone from a DIY crew to owning 2 venues and operating 2 festivals. It's Wednesday, February 28th. I'm Nick Kwa, and this is what Boise's talking about. It's such a pleasure to meet you because I'm obviously so aware of Treefort Music Hall and Treefort Festival. We've never met, but I feel like I've heard so much about you, partly as a function of knowing folks who are in the scene a little bit. But the thing that I always get confused, and so I want to start out with you walking me through some 101. Like there's Duck Club, there's Treefort Festival, there's Treefort Music Hall now. How do they relate to each other? So is like Duck Club the holding company? How do you describe the structure?
Yes, essentially. And Duck Club in name kind of got born actually after the first festival as the promoter side, because we didn't want to overuse Treefort throughout the year, but we wanted to follow up on the promise of helping talent develop Boise as a good market, both locally and from afar. So they were, for a long time, they were kind of same sort of company, but separate, but then during the pandemic, we sort of better consolidated. Now it was a Duck Club entertainment team that essentially oversees all those projects and is essentially the holding company too. But it is like the central management of the whole thing.
So if I see it in my head, like there's Duck Club and the arrow goes out and there's the booking that books venues, and then there's the hall itself, and then there's the festival. And the four parts of the festival now is Treefort and Flipside, which is the relatively new one over at Garden City. Where did the name Duck Club come from?
So when I met Laurie Chandro and Drew Larona, they were in a parallel universe in 2011, and Laurie's late husband had passed away a couple of years prior, and so she was looking to open a venue at the time, but had no experience in the music world other than being a fan. But her late husband was part of a hunting club called the Duck Club, so she was going to name the venue at the time after that. And then when she met me, because people in the industry and locally were like, hey, you should maybe connect with people that are active in the music scene, I sort of counterpitched the idea at the time, because she was just like, can you help us with a few shows? And I was like, well, what about this little festival idea we've been thinking about?
This was early 2010s. You were sort of forming the idea.
That was actually the summer of 2011. And so anyway, we created Treefort, and then after that first year, Treefort, prior to us starting Treefort, I was booking shows locally and was booking tours for bands under a thing I called Hella Bass at the time. And so after that first Treefort, I kind of presented to Laurie like, hey, I want to just keep doing this. And then we talked about using the Duck Club name for the year round side. So that's essentially the long story of where Duck Club came from.
So is there actually a stuffed duck somewhere in the office? Is there a symbol, a mascot?
We're slowly collecting ducks from thrift stores and stuff. We have brass ducks and silver ducks, and
That's really awesome. So I mean, it's fair to say that so Laurie, Drew, yourself, it's fair to say that your core heart has driven, I think, the development of Boise's local indie music scene in the last decade. If you were to sort of describe what your mission statement is, what is the philosophy driving who you pick, how you do things? How would you talk about that?
To be frank, that's one thing we may be working to distill a little bit better. But I think for us, it's from the get-go was a scene development exercise. So it was really I come out of the touring world, but I also grew up here in Boise and really wanted Boise to be a better place to either stay as a musician, but also for musicians to play here for fans. So it really has been very an artist forward approach to how can we help develop a music scene that works for the locals and also better develops it for the touring community. So that's not maybe a mission statement per se, but that's definitely our driving intention from the get-go. And it's interesting how that is then folded into other arts mediums and stuff, with the way the festival has kind of organically developed.
Right. A lot of stand-up, a lot of, you do some film for it as well.
Yeah. And I think so Megan Stahl, and she's one of the other co-founders, and she's kind of been in a lot of ways, the one in the trenches with me from the get-go a lot. And, for us, it was also, how can we develop a version of the industry that is inspiring to us and kind of disruptive in a way that there's got to be a better way, I guess. So I think Boise lends itself in its entrepreneurial spirit to try some new things, and So for us, it's very, very kind of purpose based in the experience for us and the experience for others, and then the rest of it's kind of unfolded around that. So.
Yeah. I'm gonna ask you a galaxy brain question, and because like, it's something I'm like generally kind of interested
Mm.
in. How would you define a scene? Like what makes up a scene?
The word gets overused a lot, but
Hmm.
I think it describes it well. But it has to be like an ecosystem. It has to have balance. It has to have biodiversity. Like any.
You want some plans going on?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And that's one thing. Like there's I've kind of gotten involved in music policy worlds, and a lot of it looks at that as like you need to have venues of all different sizes,
Hmm.
and then you need to have you know so you have to have people that are more kind of behind the scenes as much as people that are on stages,
Right.
and that's one of the things as the scene has developed. One thing I love now with the spaces we've opened, also taking over the Shriners, and now with the Shrine Social Club is there's not only more stage opportunities, but there's more opportunities in back of house. It was like we have a bunch of young people shadowing with us on the production side, and those opportunities were hard to come by here for a long time. And
Right. You would have to go to like Seattle or Portland or something to get those reps in, basically, something like that.
yeah, and then there's I mean, so yeah, it's a big ecosystem, and so for us there were missing pieces, right, in the Boise ecosystem
Hmm.
10 to 15 years ago, and sometimes that exists. There's like gaps on the media side. There's gaps on talent on the photography and videography side, and so it's like it's cool to see how much it has flourished in all those different areas, and there's still gaps.
We're coming up to Treefort Music Fest in a couple of weeks, and Dog Club stages it. And so it's like at this point, it's the 12th iteration
Yep,
of yeah.
yep,
Well, congratulations first of all.
yep.
So
Thank
I
you.
think you mentioned earlier that Lori's original idea was open a venue first, right? And
Hmm.
and then the sort of festival came.
Hmm.
Like as a maybe as a ladder wrap, or is it like it's sort of like, can we test this first? Well, how did the
Yeah,
festival thing come first?
yeah. So like she found me as I was kind of really active in the music scene at the time, and it was sort of like, hey, can you help us put on a couple of shows because we're
Hmm.
interested in opening a venue, and we need to know what that's like and test the market, right? So Treefort became that test of the market, and then it became a life of its own. Like it kind of surprised us what happened with that, and so for 5 or 6 years, we didn't even like the venue was no longer part of the plan. Like we weren't even talking about it.
It was like sheer momentum from the festival, basically.
Yeah, I was like, okay, there's yeah, exactly. Let's follow this momentum. But then it started becoming like, okay, how do we better stabilize our team and the business? And really, as we were seeing, the music scene grow and the city grew, we sort of realized it'd be good for us to also have some permanence in that scene. So then we started looking for potential partners to do venue projects. So about 2017, 18, we started revisiting that, and then pandemic stalled it. But then that was kind of when we had the time to sort of rethink our whole plan.
So actually, so back in 17, 18, like what would the other places you were looking at? Like where could have the other version of the Tree for Music Hall have been?
Yeah, totally. So there were a few different versions in Bodo in particular, and part of it was finding the right partners, right? But
Hmm.
there was a building actually next to the old main stage that we were really trying. In some ways that would have been an ideal for us because we'd really developed the personality there. It was always had to be in downtown Boise, so we didn't really look at. There was a couple of places we looked like a little further out, but doing what we do with the festival and stuff, we wanted to keep it in the core of the city, and so yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
If at risk of being a little too wonky, like how did that specific space pop up? Because you're right next to the cinema now, and it's like
Yeah,
kind of a central area.
so we met the development partner who was this company called Hendrix, and they
Hmm.
had taken over that building, and they'd been to the festival a few times, and we just started talking with them, and they were intrigued, thinking that someone like us could be a good anchor tenant in a broader
Yeah.
development. Now, to be frank, like Bodo was not a place that I typically came a lot. I mean, I grew up here and I know the area, but it wasn't a place I went, so I think it wouldn't have been top of mind where we would have sought. But in the end, it was like, okay, how can we be part of a bigger project and bring value to someone else and bring value to an area? And I do love the notion now that we essentially flipped a big box store, which was an office
That was
depot.
the Staples. Was it? What was
No, it
it?
was an
Office Depot.
office
Right. Right. Right.
depot,
Right.
but to turn that now into an art space and a gathering space
Yeah.
in a place that you know when there was an office depot by 7 o'clock it was dark,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
it really changes the neighborhood. And then it was cool to find a development project or partner. And one thing that's cool, they're based in Wisconsin, so they're not a local developer, but they
Hmm.
get localism and are really like passionate
Yeah.
about finding local partners. And so they saw the value in what we had developed, and that's kind of how it came together.
Yeah, it's hard not to see the genetic symbolism of taking over an Office Depot and making it into an
I
art
love
scene.
it. I love it. I love it. It's great.
Is it riskier to run a venue versus running a music festival? Like, how does that, having your hand in
Yeah,
both spaces
that's
now?
a
Like,
good question. I think they have different risks and different challenges. I think with the music festival, it's like you spend 360 days
mhm,
planning something that happens over 5 days, and
right,
there's more risk in that because it better be the best weather, it better be everything all in these 5 days.
right. All your chips in one pot.
Exactly. But then I think running a venue and that has ongoing overhead and different challenges, and then yeah, I think you know the you also have to be open on way more often on days that aren't optimal and stuff
Right,
like that. And
right.
I don't know if you know, we also have Hap Hap Lounge on top of the music hall, which has been it's been a cool new experience for us to have like a year round business, and
Yeah.
that's open 6 days a week, and it's just we do events, but it's mostly non ticketed, which is kind of different for us, and it's been really cool.
Beautiful space, great patio when it's not snowing and cold, and the trivia nights on Tuesday. Fantastic. Big
Yes,
fan.
yes, nice. That's awesome.
How has the first year of the music hall gone? Like, has it been booking well? Like, what's the energy now?
Yeah, the energy's been good, and I think we're patient. Word spreading amongst the broader industry too, like more and more talent, or like want to make this their stop,
Right.
and that's for us once again, like everything we've been doing in the scene is about augmenting what's already here, and
Hmm.
you know basically, and so I think we're just seeing between what we've done and I think other people putting energy in. There's just a lot of growing interest from the artist community throughout the country to want to stop in Boise. There's more
Yeah.
opportunity for them here, and so um, artists have been loving it. I mean, it's really cool back of house with showers and laundry and good green rooms, and the sound and lights are great. And so
Yeah.
we get lots of positive feedback from both fans and artists. But it also takes time just to get it up. This year is very exciting to us because last year, Half App didn't open until July, so we were under construction half the
Right.
year. So this year it's exciting. Okay, everything's built. We can just like run it now, and that feels good to the team. It was a big
Right.
year for the team last year for sure.
So you mentioned a little earlier that Treefort Music Hall isn't just the only venue that you're operating now. You're taking over the old Alcora Shrine. I love the
Yeah.
basement. The basement feels like somebody's
Yes.
like basement from the 70s, and
Oh,
it's
it's the best.
absolutely
Yeah.
rules. Tell me a little bit more about why the Shrine building. Like, so it feels like
Hmm.
the expansion of your real estate footprint is very, very quick. A lot of it in a very, very
Yes.
small amount of time. So tell me a little bit about the
Yes.
thinking there.
If it was up to us, we wouldn't have done it all in the same year. But the Shriners decided it was time to sell right when we were building Music Hall, and
Yeah.
so for us, at least initially on helping procure the shrine with a partner, was that it was a preservation project because most of
Hmm.
the other offers were going to scrape it. Because in a city like Boise that's growing, like the dirt under a building like that is worth more than the building itself, and
Hmm.
so for us, it was preservation first, but also we've always loved using it. And, for us, it also just expanded the all ages options. You mentioned the basement. I just
Right.
love that, having a 250 cap, like all ages space is super important
Yeah.
in a developing scene. And then also to have the ballroom upstairs, and it just kind of creates that sort of nice venue ladder for people to kind of grow here. We just love that. There's not a lot of old buildings in
No, not
Boise,
at
and
all. Yeah. I
so
mean, looking at some of like buildings being built up and development downtown, it's like they're all the sort of shiny, design of the 2020s.
yeah, which I'm cool. I like growth. I think it's good. I just also want to preserve some of these special places we have, and
Hmm.
like with the record exchange across the street from the shrine, and we're working with City of Good, who are going to start running the kitchen and run their food hub out of the basement of the shrine too. And that's all food's going to be fully active here in a couple weeks. So
All right. And are
um,
Shriners still in the building, or have they found another space?
part of so what they were looking to do it, with their aging demographic, they actually have a new location. So El Cora Shrine is their proper name, and it is now on Fairview, out kind of near
Oh, they
Milwaukee,
moved.
I
Got
think.
it.
Yes, but they still, part of the agreement with them is they still use the space for some of their ceremonies and some of their
Hmm.
e events and stuff. So they'll come downtown for that, but they move their office and some of their more regular
Right.
activities out to the new location.
Yeah. So I imagine, I mean, like my understanding of, or my impression of the music business, let alone a venue business, is that the margins are tough. It's we're
Yes,
talking
good
about
observation.
so econ 101, I guess.
Yes, yes,
And given the fast expansion, I imagine a lot of the sort of developments in the past couple of years, required investment, right? And I
yep,
think you raised some money from Andy Scoggin, who's speaking of Albertsons, like a former Albertsons exec,
yep,
has an investment business. What
yep.
can you share about that investment partnership? Like, how involved are they? How much is investment? How would you
Yeah.
describe that?
Yeah. So for one, also our development partner, Treefort Music Hall, they essentially invested a lot in the building itself. But then with
Mm-hmm.
the relatively small investor group we put together that Andy Scoggin is the lead investor for, it was more money than we'd ever raised. The investors that we knew would understand what we're doing. And for a lot of them, it was more about the impact that we have on the community than the return on their money. Now it is what they liked about it is it was also not just giving their money away. There is a return on their
Right.
money. But I think Andy really leading that mentality in a lot of ways, of like, hey, this doesn't have to be the highest monetary return. We have other opportunities to accomplish that. But with this opportunity, like, what is the cultural and community impact that we've shown over the years, and helping, knowing that putting their money to work for that, it gives me a lot of optimism. Like, I really think like the private sector needs to better understand like how they can actually put their money to work in
Right.
in positive ways for their money, but also for the things they want to see in their community. Because traditionally, like, arts funding is in the nonprofit sector, and it's just managed and delivered in a way different way.
Right. Like it's mostly grants and it's mostly a longer term cycle. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a lot of limitations to that. And then on the private sector, like the venture capitalist side, it's like, what's the highest
Right.
return? And so somewhere in the middle where you start doing that, because especially in like music and film,
Right.
like it's a very entrepreneurial, like it's very often like a for-profit world
Right.
with tiny margins. Like, it's not like it's
Right.
like no one's. So I think really like the fluency of local capital, understanding like how to participate in that locally is
Right.
exciting to me. And I think that's one of the maybe the wins of the recent project.
Speaking of Econ 101, right? Like investors tend to really determine the long term fate or the sort of collapse of a thing, right? So like I know when I think about the usual arc of a lot of well known music festivals, like I'm thinking about
Yeah.
not the shade or anything, but the Coachellas and all and Lollapaloozas and stuff. The the turn always happens with like major corporate sponsorship.
Yep.
Was there ever a moment in which like you considered like taking Capital One money or something? Not not to specify any individual source, but like was that something that ever crossed as a possibility?
I mean, I think we will consider all things, but but it has to be against this lens of like it can't compromise our core mission and our
Hmm.
promise to the community, right? To be who we are. And so, if someone is willing to be a good partner to that, I think we're not closed off to it, if
Hmm.
that makes sense. And if we work with local corporations, or sometimes there's bigger names that are involved, it's on our terms of like helping us accomplish these goals. And I think that's something we bring for other brands, right? It's like, okay, well, we're trying to be a better brand here
Right.
in like Boise, and these folks can help show that we're trying, I guess.
Yeah. So okay, I actually want to learn a bit more about you specifically. So you're the lead talent buyer at Duck Club. You've mentioned that you've worked at festivals. You used to do booking for touring. How do you end up in this path?
That's a good question. A long time ago, I was with my wife Lisa. I just wanted to play one live show in a band, and I put the work into doing that. And ever since then, I accomplished my goal a long time ago. So, it sort of just put me on this path of chasing music.
What was the scene? What was your music?
I had a band called Finn Riggins that was based out of here. We were a trio, as my wife and I, and a drummer, and kind of eclectic indie rock, for lack of a better
Hmm.
term. But I play keyboards. I actually just was on tour last weekend. I'm in a band called Floating Witch's Head now. Like, with our organization, it's maybe a little hokey, but I think when putting together any sort of business or organization, I think of it kind of like putting together a band. Like, you
Hmm.
want people with diverse skill sets, but most importantly, you want people you can get along with and are going to try hard, and you can kind of accomplish a lot. So our whole team is built from folks that have basically learned on the field with
Yeah.
us, and so my path. I was an engineering student before I decided to
Oh
pursue
yeah.
music. Yeah, like I interned at Micron after my freshman year and decided I had a realization that I had time to try some other things before I could, and so I've been trying the
Yeah.
music world since. And so yeah.
So you never left that trying period, that experimentation period.
Yeah, I definitely didn't set out to like someday I'm going to start a music festival
Yeah.
and own and operate a few different venues. That stuff has sort of found its way to me over time.
Yeah. So back when you were playing like in bands here in like, regionally, but in Boise, like what were the venues that you could play at here in Boise?
So we would play Neuralex a lot. We played
Hmm.
Visual Arts Collective in Garden
Yeah,
City.
two fine institutions. Yeah.
To be honest with you, I grew up in the suburbs here, so I like to say I grew up in suburban anywhere, and I didn't
Hmm.
really. So I didn't. I mean, even though I grew up in quote unquote Boise, it didn't feel like I didn't really know Boise as the city that it is, right? And so when I started coming back and started playing Visual Arts Collective, that was the first place that kind of gave me some real promise. I was like, oh wow, Boise's cool. Like what's
Hmm.
going on here again? So those were kind of two primary places. We were on a label out of Portland, so we actually spent a lot of people thought we were a Portland band back at that time, even though our address was still here
Yeah.
in Idaho. But
It's interesting how often that happens. Like Boise bands get coded as like a Seattle Portland band.
yeah, yeah. So I think one of the things, especially in the last couple of years with places like Realms opening and the Shredders gotten great, and is there's more small cap all ages opportunities here than there ever
Hmm.
has been, and that's really there's so much young talent here right now, and in a
Yeah.
large part because there's space for them to exist in.
Right.
And it's been really cool to see that, with Shrine Basement and the Shrine in general. And it's just, I was talking to some other folks the other day who've been in the scene even longer than me, and they're like, this is the best they've seen the Boise music scene ever.
Yeah.
It's just, there's like a lot of cooperation, and everyone's, really throwing in their hat and putting a
Hmm.
lot of energy in. So it's good. I feel like when we were first coming back here and playing, there was just like some jadedness and skepticism, and
Hmm.
there's still a lot of people like leaving the city. I use an anecdote all the time about we were on tour in 2010, and there was this Michigan reporter asked us what it was like coming from a musically devoid state like Idaho. And
Jeez.
I mean, that was the nature of what people thought of the
Yeah.
Idaho music scene at the time. It just was not visible. And I think obviously we've played a large role in that, but a lot of others too. And Idaho and Boise are thought of as a music city now. It's like a place that is, if you're a Boise band now, you're like, oh, you're in Boise. I hear Boise's cool, as opposed to like, Boise, why do you live there?
So I mean, there's a sense that between all the venues now, there's enough business to go around.
Well, that's the thing is I think music. This goes back to your question about scenes too.
Hmm.
Like venues thrive when there's more venues, not actually when there's less venues, because it starts creating like it's just the scene is kind of dead and people aren't
Yeah.
seeking it as much. Right now, some of the venues have been around a long time. They may question that philosophy, but I think it's but I do think it's true, and you see it right now. Like the Boise music scene is thriving, and it has more venues than it's ever had.
Well, speaking of the Arco Grove, because like I feel like it's very common, and having moved through like art scenes of my own, it's like when a thing gets big enough, you know, the sort of original participants or veteran participants of the scene, it's like, oh yeah, it lost its soul, or like it's losing a certain
Yeah,
like je ne sais quoi or something.
yeah.
How do you think about that kind of arc? Because at some point, growth is important. You want to support more people, but there are ways in which growth like shaves away certain characteristics, certain say, identifiers. How do you think about stuff like that?
And tying it back to the festival a little bit, the way we like to think of it is we are amplifying what makes Boise great, but also being aspirational about what's possible with
Hmm.
it. And so what I see right now, at least in the music scene, is there's a lot of, and I'm one of them. Really, I'm older now, but there's folks that have been in the music generation before me too that are active. And I think I was talking about this last weekend. Actually, there's real like multi generational respect, right?
Hmm.
The people that have been part of the scene for a long time are also reaping the benefits too. That there's little less like just like sitting on the sidelines and feeling like they got left behind, I guess.
Yeah.
So I think that's a real positive thing. But I also think that, to your point, like growth is good and growth is inevitable, and I think it's good to have respect for the past, but to just lament, like I always this always drives me nuts with like my in-laws or somebody just being like back in our day it was so much better, and I was like, well, I can list a lot of reasons it wasn't better. There were good things about it, but there's
Yeah.
also good things about now. So like I guess I
No,
uh
I can definitely
yeah.
relate to that. Yeah. How would you? I mean, okay. What's next? What's how we should we think about what comes next for y'all?
Yeah, I think for us this year is very much like a focus and consolidate and really just like let's like make, we last year was, like you said, we grew real fast,
Mm-hmm.
and it wasn't necessarily by design. It was sort of out of necessity with how things were moving in the city. And I'm really looking forward to downtown Boise. Really, like, I think it's a whole new era is right on its doorstep right now,
Right,
and we're
right,
excited to be a part of that, and hoping like all of us in the small business world downtown can survive and thrive. So I think,
right.
so for us, it's very much like, okay, no new projects this year.
Let's stabilize the ship.
Let's stabilize the ship. And so, especially last year, we had to move the main stage for the festival. I mean, it was just
Yeah,
a lot of change all at the same time. And so, which was exciting and great. I'm impressed at how well the team did with it. But this year is like, let's find our stride a little bit, and
yeah.
maybe take some breaks every once in a while.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me. This is super fun.
Yeah. Same, Nick.
That's all for today here on CityCast Boise. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend about us? We'll be back tomorrow morning with more local stories from around the city. Bye.